Hey everyone, welcome to Counsel, Trent podcast. I'm your host, Catholic Answers apologist and speaker, Trent Horn. Joining me is Cameron Bertuzzi from Capturing Christianity. And today we are talking about what Catholics should not say to Protestants. And I think, Cameron, you'd be an excellent guest to talk about that because of your recent announcement that you plan to be received into the Catholic Church. Now, you've been publicly investigating this for quite a while, so it's not a surprise to people.
Yeah.
You were investigating the claims of Catholicism, kind of a jumping off point from your original discussion with Matt Fradd a while ago. And so I think that I'm really excited to talk to you about this today because there's a lot of commingling between Catholics and Protestants amongst Capturing Christianity, Pints of Aquinas, my podcast, because you have a lot of people who care about defending mere Christian theism, the existence of God, the resurrection, but then they disagree about Catholic Protestant issues. And sometimes those disagreements are very fruitful. Other times, it's like, I wish you hadn't said this or that. So I think someone who's been on both sides, someone who's a Protestant investigating and now you are convicted, but I think you can really help us speak to, all right, what is helpful for a Protestant who's looking at Catholicism, and what is just not helpful, that just is kind of repellent maybe. So I don't know what you think of that.
Well, the first thing that came to mind is actually something that occurred after I made the announcement.
Interesting.
And that is all of the welcome home messages that I received.
Really?
So yeah, in one sense, I really understand like the sentiment and wanting to welcome someone to what you believe is true.
Right.
But at the same time, it did come across, like everybody was saying it.
Right.
And it's also hard for me to put into terms like exactly how I feel about it, because it's in some sense it feels kind of cringy, but in some sense it feels like appropriate. It feels like, you should be kind of doing that. Yeah. So it's hard for me. Like this first one, I'm kind of like, I kind of want to say don't do it, but I also kind of understand and like.
Well, I think there's a fine line, and honestly, when we talk about today, like what people shouldn't say to one another, everybody's different.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, right.
What is fine to one person could be offensive to another person. But I think that we can sift through on some of these, say like, yeah, nearly everyone's going to be offended by that, or this could go either way. So like, perhaps some of the notes of congratulations, you have to watch out because it can be easy maybe to slide into being kind of patronizing.
Or like,
or denigrating.
The term that I want to use is like claiming victory.
Triumphal.
Kind of triumphal, yeah.
Yes, triumphalism.
So it can kind of sound like that at times. But again, I think that most people are like, the like what they're actually trying to communicate is something very nice.
Right.
And so that's why I'm like, this isn't a super big deal, but it is nevertheless like,
but I think
need to do that.
Well, maybe what's important to remember, and so let's say we're talking about, so right now we're talking about Catholics speaking to Protestants who have announced that they would like to become Catholic.
Right.
I think that maybe an important thing to keep in mind is that while a Catholic may be feeling very emotionally high, like, oh, this is great, this is amazing, this is awesome, let's do this right now, somebody get the oil over here and the bishop get confirmed right now. You might feel very, and Matt, that's not a dig on you or anything like that, but that obviously a Catholic will feel very happy, but for someone who's Protestant, it's like almost like you can have like a queasy feeling. It's like that feeling you get when you're a little kid and you go to the amusement park and you finally hit 52 inches and you can go on the double loop roller coaster. You're like, yeah, I'm going to do it. Whew. I mean, right. Is that maybe like, it's still kind of like you, and someone's like, yeah, all right. You're like, hey, this is still a big step for me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's actually like a good way of putting it, I think, is it is kind of still like, this is still kind of intimidating, Yeah.
So, and you want to walk someone through that, there's like, okay, let's, be, and what I would always say, like when somebody tells me like, oh, I'm becoming Catholic, or I read your book and now I want to be Catholic. What I always want to say is praise be to God. Praise be to God that he used, maybe something was in my book or maybe this person or that person to lead you to his church. And I want to give him praise and thanks for that. And now what can I do to help you to be more fully incorporated and understand and continue your journey may be. So I think the idea of treating is like welcome home. It's like I'm still kind of trying to get there.
Yeah.
And you want to help be there to like, hey, you got questions, figure things out. Let's keep walking through that maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but again, I think that, I mean, in kind of defense of the people that have said that is, I think they might just be expressing something like praise God.
Exactly. It's well-meaning.
Yes, exactly.
And I would agree with that. And I think it's just, you just have to understand that when you say something, just remember this person could still be in a anxious or queasy or uneasy position.
I love the analogy that you gave of the roller coaster.
The roller coaster. It's like, hey, you might have
there.
Yeah, you've been on the roller coaster 100 times. And it's like, yeah, you're going to ride now. It's like, hey, he hasn't done it 100 times. Let's just be cognizant of that.
Yeah, and like even like when I go to mass and stuff, it's still very foreign to me. It's still very strange.
Well, when I was coming into the church myself, that was about 20 years ago. I was always like, how am I supposed to sit or stand? What am I supposed to
like? Everybody knows what to say at the right time and like the order of the service and how it's all going to go.
Yeah, but you know what? I did sort of feel that again about 4 years ago when I started attending a Byzantine Catholic church. So this would be a church in the Eastern Rite. And I sort of had that same feeling all over again, that it's a very different liturgical rubric because it comes from an Eastern liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, St. Basil the Great. But you're right. I think it's like you want to help people where you can be happy about it, but just always be cognizant of where they're at and be there to meet their needs, I guess.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
What are some other things you think may not be super helpful, especially even, let's say, maybe there's people who have announced?
Yeah, let me pull up my list. So another thing is that, and I think part of this was my fault in that I didn't really communicate where Brittany was.
Sure.
But
your wife.
My wife, Brittany, yeah. I didn't communicate that she was still firmly Protestant in the announcement videos. And part of the reason why I did that is because I wanted to respect her privacy and but what happened as a result of that, I think people just kind of assumed that she came along on the journey and was like converting as well or something. And so she was receiving all of these same types of messages from Catholics congratulating her on converting and welcome home. And here are all these different resources that you can do now that you're a Catholic and stuff. And it was a lot. So,
and it's hard because this is emotional for her, just processing this major change that you've made.
Right.
And then now, and it would be hard enough if nobody else knew about this.
Right.
And now when you open your, because that, like for me, like I am grateful, like 20 years ago when I chose to become Catholic, I was just some kid in high school. You know, I can just listen to my William Lane Craig debates and I can read a book and I can decide, and I've got a few people to talk about it with, but it's not like the whole, like I will say, I'm just so grateful how God has worked through everything to bring you to this point. But I am not envious of the position you were in, because it's so weird. It's like, I'm going to become Catholic. Well, what am I supposed to say to Gavin Ortland and James White? Well, I'm going to stay Protestant. Well, how am I supposed to explain that to Swan Sana and Jimmy Akin? It's like, here are all these people who studied all this stuff, and you guys are right and you're wrong. Here's why. Like, no one can ever be in a position to like, you know, is that?
Yeah. I think that's part of it. But
and then all the other anonymous people like saying stuff. So then
what I was going to say is that one of the biggest differences, obviously, from like a normal conversion story or someone, and my conversion story is that it was very, very public.
Right.
Okay. So I think what we've seen is there's always going to be people that make assumptions. Always going to, like, even Brittany was even receiving like emails from Catholics saying that she was going to hell and stuff. And it was like,
because she wasn't converting?
Because she wasn't converting.
We'll add that as an asterisk. Things Catholics shouldn't say to Protestants. If you don't convert, you're going to hell.
Don't say that.
Well, I mean, because here's the thing. Even if there is a true proposition, even if there's something because you could say to someone, you know, because that's like a very basic kind of evangelism you could say in general, like to someone, it's not always just going to get you right off the ground to start talking. You know?
Yeah, I mean, that is one thing that people have used in the past, is this sort of hellfire preaching.
Right.
And, you know, Catholics aren't alone in using it.
Right.
But Protestant, I mean, we went to a basketball game the other night. We were invited to go, and there were people outside with signs about, you know, you're going to hell and everything. It's like,
because of basketball?
No, they were just out there like evangelizing. So,
because then there's people who might say, Brittany, in choosing to not become Catholic, you're going to hell. And I'm sure there's people saying that you're damned now because you've joined the Catholic Church.
Yes.
And you're open to arguments. You're like, that doesn't immediately help me to want to engage your position. Like, what's your reason?
Exactly. Yeah. That's not the best way to get someone interested in to hear what you got to say.
Well, in logic, there is a kind of not ad hominem, it's called argumentum ad baculum, the appeal to force. Believe this or else this bad thing will happen. Now, on the one hand, it is appropriate to let people know, if you believe X, this is consequence Y.
Yeah.
And there is a place to do that. But I think that it's just, people will say it's like, I'm just being tough love and just saying it like it is. I'm going to be honest with you. I think in a lot of those cases, I think it's because it's easier for you to just say that than it is to make a case or engage in a gracious dialogue. And you'd rather not do those harder things that are more effective.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, but
with Brittany though, like, so back to the spouses, you don't want to assume.
Yeah, that's just the kind of the main point is of this second one is, don't assume that both are on the same journey, together, or that they've come to the same conclusion, even if they have gone on the journey together. So but what I was going to say too is that I think that what we're seeing is, because it is so public, there's all like, this may not happen on a smaller scale. So like if, a group of friends hears that someone is converting or whatever, most people are, I would assume, are just going to kind of like leave it alone, and it's not going to be that big of a deal. But if it's on a public platform and there's thousands of people that are aware of what's going on, then you're bound to have people who make those sorts of assumptions, and it's bound to happen. So I'm not saying that like it was unexpected or anything, but I am saying that just be aware of it. Don't just assume that.
And I think a point you raised, I don't know if we said this, but I think that there is a concern maybe about this can happen to anybody. Yeah. But let's say Catholic speaking to Protestants is a kind of triumphalism.
Yeah.
A sense of, we got one. Or maybe on a smaller scale, may not, let's take the smaller scale, just regular people. Someone says something like, I'm not sure. I'm looking into Catholicism and I'm not sure. Or I'm Protestant. Like, someone says like a weird a comment like, oh, well, you're Catholic, you just don't know it yet. Or, oh, well, we'll get you eventually. Or it's these kind of semi-triumphalist comments. I feel like those have the propensity to maybe rub somebody the wrong way.
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of used to that as like someone who talks about atheism. There's a lot of atheists that engage in our comments and everything. And so I'm kind of used to people like saying things, making assumptions about my motives and all that kind of stuff. And so it's easy for me at this point, now that I'm so used to it, I can ignore a lot of that. And comments of people saying, oh, well, he'll get there eventually. There was actually someone in person that I met in Steubenville who said that at dinner. Yeah. Like, oh, you'll get there eventually. And I was like, okay.
Yeah, you're like, it can, once again.
At that point, I had all of my objections still. I had like from annihilationism, from divine simplicity, and the Eucharist, and I was like, I mean, I don't know that that's ever going to happen.
Well, it can come off once again of hubris, triumphalist, instead of wanting to meet someone where they're at. You're saying like, I pray you get there, and I have hope. Yeah, or something like you. Once again, the things you say or not say. Some people will have different senses of humor. They can take a rougher abrasion. Other people, it's like, hey, you don't want to be. I think you should always err on the side of being gracious to people. So, but it's interesting there about the speculating on motives might be interesting, because we wouldn't like it if an atheist said to us, the only reason you're Christian is because you're afraid of dying, or you're afraid of life being meaningless, or you did this because your parents told you, or you did this or that. So maybe that might be another one, like Catholics. You don't, when you're talking to a Protestant, don't say, oh, well, the reason you're Protestant is because you want to be your own pope, or you don't want to give up this teaching or that, or you don't want to give up this moral practice. It can, it can be the same grading thing.
Even if it's right, like even if it's right, that's true. Like, is that Is that the best way to go about?
Do you want to tell people that, or do you want to ask them questions and they essentially reveal that to you? That's more powerful.
Yeah, if you can get to that point, I would find that very difficult to like ask questions to the point of them revealing, oh yeah, I just believe it because my background or whatever. That's how.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It's kind of like I had a conversation with an atheist once, and we were going through a lot of the objections. And she eventually said it wasn't really the arguments. It was the fact that her friends at church kind of cut her off, or they weren't as good friends with her after she decided to move in with her boyfriend. And she didn't think that was a big deal. And that was kind of the nub more than kind of more of the rational arguments. But if I had just come right out the gate, said like, well, the reason you're an atheist is because you like fornication. That's why. You know, sometimes it's just like you want to move things slower and help people to see even if it is true, but it might not be true.
Right. Even if that is like the deepest reason why someone is holding their belief. Like,
yeah. So if a Catholic
is that the most effective thing to do? It's probably not.
Yeah. You do. So I guess you don't want to speculate on motives.
Yeah.
Just reach people to what they say to you. What are some other things that you have found not helpful when Catholics, especially maybe a Protestant who's just, I'm open-minded.
Yeah.
You know, I'm interested in Catholicism. What do you have to say?
Yeah. So I was thinking about this a lot. And one of the things that I noticed, like, and it seems it's going to sound obvious, like to a lot of Catholics, but just try to stick to using the Bible, you know, as much as you can.
Interesting.
If you want to persuade a Protestant to become Catholic. And I know that that's difficult because, you know, obviously Catholics don't assume sola scriptura. So one of the things that you could do is argue against that, right? You could argue against sola scriptura and then say, well, now we have other grounds. But maybe emotionally, there's a tie. The Protestant has an emotional tie,
right, to
sola scriptura, or affirming that the Bible is like the ultimate authority and that's the only thing that we can use.
So or maybe they have an idea that like Catholics just have a very low view of scripture in general, or it's not that important to theology. And if you just don't talk about it, that could reinforce that incorrect stereotype.
Well, and something that I've found, I mean, because it's not as if Catholicism is like just this random branch of Christianity that has nothing to do with the Bible. Right. There's all sorts of verses that can be appealed to and that are often appealed to in defense of like all sorts of these different doctrines and traditions. And so because, you know, there is no assumption of sola scriptura or anything like that, then you can obviously appeal to the magisterium and to other things. So, but for a Protestant, it's really helpful, very persuasive, if you can make an argument from the Bible. Is that would be my point, is don't not use the Bible.
Use the Bible.
Use the Bible. just use the Bible.
Use the Bible.
Yeah. Well, and I'm not saying don't just. Well, maybe I am saying just use the Bible.
Well, don't straitjacket yourself.
Yeah.
But I think one of the best things a Catholic can do when talking to a Protestant about Catholicism is to express biblical fluency in the sense of that because you have a deep love of Scripture.
Right.
You see Catholicism infused throughout Scripture,
right? And
then you can reference that and talk about it. You know what? I'll be honest. I think many Catholics, the reason they might get scared talking about the Bible with Protestants is they feel outgunned because Catholics are often not raised with a chapter verse mentality. So Scott Hahn would put it this way, that Protestants know the Bible like a mailman knows the neighborhood. He knows the Johnsons live on 1234 Elm Street. You know, he knows where street address of every house. Catholics know the neighborhood like the 10-year-old kid knows it. He may not know the address, but he knows, well, the Johnsons live by the yellow fire hydrant by the barking dog.
Yeah. And
so they know where this stuff is in a more intuitive way. And so you can feel intimidated when you want to talk with a Protestant. They'll say, well, why don't you believe in eternal security? What about Philippians 1:6? What about, listing off chapter and verse as a Catholic? You're like, well, I've heard this stuff. Because like when you're Protestant, it seems like a lot of Protestants with their kids in, what's it called? Awana? I remember this program. It's kind of like Vacation Bible School, but it's like a program for Protestant children just to like learn to memorize scripture, essentially.
And we never did that growing up. So
well, there you go. That's why Catholics got him. They got him because if he'd only there's going to be a Protestant response to it. If he had only memorized the scriptures.
If he had only been in the programs that I like,
right,
then he'd stay Protestant.
But I think that can, for Catholics, there's this like feeling, no, you do know a lot about the Bible. Even if you don't know the chapter and verse, you can point to parts and say, yeah, but what about this? So what you're saying is don't be afraid of that. Don't, try to incorporate the Bible as much as possible when you're sharing the faith.
Yeah. What I'm saying is that the Bible is very persuasive to a Protestant, right?
Yeah.
And those were the parts of like your book on the case for Catholicism. Those parts of your book were the ones that I was like really focused on. I was like, okay, now I need to pay attention. Like he's talking about some verse in John.
Because
now he's talking about Matthew.
Because that's interesting, because it feels like a lot of Catholics just go straight to like the church fathers as like almost like a kind of trump card.
Yeah, or like a validation of their interpretation of the passages.
Right. And maybe you can speak to that as to what's effective or not as effective about just because I feel like maybe
the church fathers to me, I didn't even really care about them. I was just like, I just really want to know what the Bible says.
Yeah.
And I'm way more interested in reading like what a contemporary scholar might have to say about this passage,
right,
and the implications and the background and everything, as opposed to reading someone who was back in the day. Right. Because I part of and this could be idiosyncratic, so this may not apply to other Protestants, but for me, I had the assumption that today's scholars are going to be familiar with the older literature, and they're going to be familiar with newer literature. And so there's a sort of wider, maybe they're going to be a little bit more reliable because they have access to all of the church fathers, as opposed to just like one church father giving his opinion and then reading another church father. They're trying to provide maybe a synthesis of all of the church fathers and their own views and what they've learned about the historical background and everything and the Jewish roots of Jesus and whatnot. So I had kind of been working off the assumption that the contemporary scholars are like the ones that we should kind of like be listening to.
So like somebody who has access to lexicons and materials now might be in a better position to know about a first century practice than, let's say, someone in the 5th century.
Right. Well, something that Michael Lofton said the other day on his channel was interesting to me. It was all about the Eliakim typological argument and stuff that was going on. And he was like, if you actually, and maybe he's wrong about this, but I mean, I don't really have reason to suspect that he's wrong about this. But I believe he said that in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, it was part of the verse in Isaiah 22:22 is missing from that. And so that was one of the potential suggestions that he gave as to why that hasn't really been tied from the very beginning of the church, why this sort of typological argument wasn't made, is because it wasn't in the Greek Septuagint, which is what the early church fathers were using. And so that is also something that I want to.
Well, yeah, that is an argument that's often made, that a Catholic will offer a proof text. It's kind of like I'm planning to write a book on Protestant use of the church fathers here soon, saying Catholics will use this proof text, but the church fathers didn't use this proof text. So maybe it doesn't mean what they think it means. I might do a deep dive on that soon, because I worry that same argument, like a Mormon or a Jehovah's Witness could say, you use this proof for the deity of Christ or for the Trinity,
and they didn't do it.
But the church fathers didn't use the verse in this way,
right? So, and that's an important doctrine.
Yeah, that's a central doctrine.
That's one of the responses to this the whole papacy thing the deep dive into the papacy, is that the papacy is such an important central doctrine. Why wouldn't they have seen this back in the day? And of course, there are people like Daniel Vecchio who argue that I think that there is early attestation of it, but.
Right. And then once again, I would say, all right, are we holding the same standard? So I like what you said, that Catholics should be biblically fluent. I think it can also be helpful, like if I'm engaging a Protestant, this idea that, Catholics are more about tradition than scripture. Like I'd almost say, well, here are all of the biblical, you may disagree with them, but here's all of the biblical data for the papacy. Where is the biblical data for sola scriptura? And I think the common argument now, like the strongest form that's put out, is it's more of a logical argument than a biblical argument. So I think it's sometimes interesting. I might compare a Protestant doctrine and a Catholic doctrine and noting, hey, are you going to hold yourself to the same standard of wanting robust biblical data? So, but yeah, biblical fluency, absolutely. Maybe, I don't know if there's any others that you just feel like, okay, if
I've got two others.
Two others. Let's hop into them.
Yeah. Okay. So number 4 is don't be pushy, which we've kind of like touched on that here and there. But what I would say is this is something that I learned with if you guys, or you may not know my story, the reason why I'm in apologetics and philosophy in the first place is because my brother became an atheist a little over a decade now. And one thing that I had to learn early on, because when I started to research apologetics and philosophy and these arguments for the existence of God, all I wanted to do was to share all of this with him and be like, okay, convert, come back to Christianity. Here's all these great reasons to be a Christian. And what I learned is that like he knew when I had an ulterior motive, when I would go into a conversation, just like, I don't know, at Thanksgiving or any other sort of meeting that we were at. And I always had that motive. Like I was always trying to put something on him and share some argument, share some thought, spark up a conversation about apologetics. I even remember telling him one day, I was like, Trevor, this is never going away. Like I'm never going to leave you alone about this. And now that I like looking back on that now, it's very cringy. And the reason for that is eventually I had to come to the realization that what I was doing with my brother is I was like kind of using him, or I was using arguments as a sort of weapon in his case. And in every conversation that we had, I had an ulterior motive. So it wasn't necessarily that I was actually trying to love on my brother. I was trying to beat him up with an argument and force him back into Christianity.
And every conversation is just an excuse to get to an argument.
Exactly.
Instead of just having an actual fulfilling relationship.
Exactly. And so I had to like kind of reorient my entire approach to my brother and really just remind myself, like, this is my brother. I just need to love on him. And like we can hang out. We don't have to talk about God or Christianity or apologetics or arguments every time that we meet. And so I changed my approach and just reminded myself that I needed to love on him, and not the kind of love where you're loving him just so you can, so you still have this ulterior motive, but genuine love, like just for the other person.
Intrinsic versus instrumental.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's for the sake of just willing his good. Because there's lots of things that are good for someone beyond having the correct faith is a good thing, but it's also good that, you have a roof over your head. You have good relationships with other people as a social creature. There are other goods, like to love someone, even if to love someone, we can will those goods for a person, genuinely for them, regardless of what they do in their faith journey. So
applying this now to the whole like Catholicism question. Don't do what I did with my brother, right? Don't, like if you have someone in your life who is a Protestant and who is maybe even they're not like open to considering what you have to say or whatever, you still, I think, have to orient yourself correctly toward that person. And the way to do that is to orient yourself toward love and focus, get that down first before you go and try to have conversations with them. But what I've learned is that it's once you have a sort of foundation of love as the foundation of the relationship with this other person, then you can just let conversations happen organically. And when they do, they can be productive, because I think what another sort of aspect of these earlier conversations I had with my brother is that they were in a defensive context. I was defensive and he was defensive. Whereas now love kind of like breaks down those barriers. So it's instead of like trying to defend what I believe. I'm focused on loving him and being open to like, well, maybe I am wrong about something. And so that's what I would suggest do for Protestants. So don't treat them as like case studies, or like don't treat them as little things that you're trying to win, or you know what I mean?
Right.
Like treat them like actual people and love them first, and don't be too pushy.
Don't be pushy.
Yeah, don't be pushy.
Don't be too pushy, because you might have to nudge a little.
Every now and then you might have to say something, you know. But I do that with my brother too. I'm like, hey, what do you think about this? But again, it's in the context now of a loving relationship.
You've earned the ability to do that.
Yes.
Yeah, you've earned the ability to do that. And maybe another thing, and it's so funny. I gotta run back and add an appendix to my When Protestants Argue Like Atheists book. Maybe it's because that'd be when Catholics. It's like, just as a Protestant, you don't want to be pushy with an atheist friend or family member, and you want to bring them to the faith. As a Catholic, talking with a Protestant or a Protestant who may have these is all just basic charity. Anybody can apply these to anyone you're talking about. But I think what would be most fruitful would be, all right, focusing on areas where we agree. Like as a Catholic and a Protestant, I think one of the most effective ways to build up a relationship with Protestant brothers and sisters and to open the door to talk about Catholicism is just invest a lot of time in the things we passionately agree about. I know a lot of people who are Catholic because they were like the two Protestants in the local pro-life group that's all Catholics. And I've heard that story. There's a whole anthology similar to that from Patrick Madrid called Surprised by Life. And I've heard this story. It's like, we were the only Protestants in our church, so we'd pray in front of the abortion clinic. And like, we just talked Catholics all the time out there, and then it just kind of happened. Or like, if I'm working with Protestants on engaging sophisticated atheism, and like that's what we're spending all our time on. And then we're talking about classical theism, or we're talking about Aquinas. And then it like naturally leads to, what do you think about some of this other stuff? I guess it's like, so we're talking about the don'ts. Don't just rush to the areas where we disagree and fight it out. Let's spend a lot of time where we agree. And then it makes it a lot easier to talk. All right, now we'll talk about the disagreement. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, and thinking back with my brother as well, like there are many times where I've actively sought to have conversations with him on things that we agree about. Yeah, that are somewhat related to the area. I even remember one time we were, again, it was a sort of an organic conversation that was happening, but his views had seemed to have shifted toward, and this was way before I was even interested in Catholicism, but his views had sort of shifted toward a view that sounded very close to classical theism. And I was like, I just suggested to him one day, I was like, maybe you should like consider classical theism. And I mean, he hadn't really had any familiarity with it, but yeah, I forget where I was going with that.
Well, it's like finding, let's say you're talking with an atheist friend.
Finding areas of it, yes.
Yeah. So it's like, instead of saying, all right, here is a Kalam argument, and here's why your objections don't work. Instead of saying, okay, maybe we agree that God is not a delusion. God is not a stupid idea. There are compelling arguments out there, and atheists who say arguments don't matter, they're incorrect. It's like, yeah, and because I've enjoyed seeing online people like Rationality Rules or others engaging, or Scott Clifton and others engaging, or especially Real Atheology does this. Real Atheology does this so much. They get accused of being secret Christians. Yeah. Of saying to other atheists, hey, this isn't that great of an argument, or hey, this actually isn't what Christians believe. So it's like, if you're talking with like an atheist friend, it's like, well, this aspect, these arguments, aspects of atheism, that's not good. So maybe like with a Protestant saying, hey, these caricatures of Catholicism, or this aspect of Protestantism. Oh, here's another one. Maybe when Catholics speak to a Protestant, you could speak to, recognize that Protestant is this giant spectrum. And like, you really so maybe you could speak to that. You have to really spend a lot of time with someone to find out what they believe, because if you just hear that they're Protestant, that could mean a ton of things. Yeah.
Well, something I was going to talk about that's related to that. Let me see if that's actually
your fifth point.
My fifth point.
Or this 4.5.
This is 5.
Okay.
It is somewhat related to that, in that what I was going to say is encourage the Protestants to really take their objections to Catholicism seriously. And so I think that's related to what you were saying, because everyone has, I think a lot of Protestants have their own sort of baggage that they bring to the table.
Right.
And everyone is going to have their own unique objections. And I've seen that with Brittany. I've seen it with other Protestants, is everyone has, James White, Gavin Ortlund, they all have their own set of issues or problems with the Catholic Church. And so the suggestion that I was going to have is just encourage them to actually take their issues seriously. So don't forget that. Like, don't forget if I was pushed by someone to be like, because I had my objections to Catholicism, I would label them as like pretty superficial. So even though I was like, I just could never, I could not understand the doctrine of divine simplicity. I was like, I just can't, it doesn't make any sense to me. But I hadn't done a deep study on divine simplicity. Like, I haven't actually gone out and read works and tried to understand proponents of the view and stuff. It just seemed to me very confusing, seemed on the surface of it just to not make any sense. And so maybe if I had actually done a study on it, I could have worked through that. And so the suggestion is kind of similar to like, focus on things that are going to be persuasive to that person, encourage them to actually take their objections seriously.
Maybe another one I would add here is Catholics not say to Protestants, don't make acceptance of Catholicism hinge on accepting your particular Catholic theology. And maybe, and I think especially among some Catholics who have more conservative views that might say, no, it's this theology or bust, without recognizing that within Catholicism, you have that. I guess a classic example would be it's Aquinas or bust, unless you are that they're like, if you're a Catholic,
unless you're like a full-blown Thomist,
don't bother. Or the idea of saying Catholics don't say to Protestants, don't turn Catholicism into Thomism or Scotism or any or other particular kinds of niche theological views. We recognize, of course, Aquinas as a pride of place. But knowing, I guess, presenting to people there is theological where the church allows theological diversity. So, for example,
it's narrower in Catholicism than it is in Protestantism.
It is.
It's narrower, but there still is variety.
But saying, like, for example, I can't wrap my head around the brethren of the Lord being cousins. That's not persuasive to me at all. Instead of saying, well, if you can't accept that, tough on you. It's saying, well, no, the church hasn't defined the nature of the brethren of the Lord. It's just said what they're not. They're not children of Mary, but they could be children of Joseph from a previous marriage. These are live options. So material, this gets into material sufficiency debates. There's all these kinds of intra-debates. So I think maybe that's one thing. When you present the Catholic faith, present as many live options as possible. It's similar, I guess, if you were talking to an atheist, you wouldn't say, well, if you don't accept young earth creationism, you can't be Christian.
Right. Yeah,
it's like,
that's a good example. I was trying to think of a good example, but that's a good one. Yeah, you don't have to be a young earth creationist to be a Christian, obviously.
Right. Or, taking different views about the
even if you're convinced of young earth creationism.
Right.
You don't have to tell the atheist, well, you've got to believe this in order to become a Christian.
Yeah, you can say, I believe it for these reasons.
Yeah.
But you're allowed to do that. But there's diversity there. So I think that's important to understand when we present the faith to Protestants, present Catholicism and say, there's here's the things that you cannot disagree about. The things are de fide. These are infallibly taught. Here are other issues that are a bit more open, and just to be honest about that. So great. I don't know if there's anything else on your mind about some last words, Catholics, even just general attitudes when you're engaging Protestant friends or family.
Yeah, I would just reiterate to really focus on loving the other person, and just kind of say that again, is that's something that I think is kind of overlooked, because we get so wrapped up in, like, I think we do really get emotionally tied to apologetics. Yeah. Be it Catholic apologetics or just broader Christian apologetics. I think we get emotionally tied to that, and we think that we have to, like, present that every time that we talk to someone, or say things in a certain way that's going to lend itself toward a conversation like that. But I think that we need to really reorient ourselves and remember that we're talking to people.
Right.
And instead of like, I think that's just a big mistake that we can, and everyone falls into it, you know, everyone falls into the trap of like just wanting to use these arguments and trying to win people over to your own particular view, as opposed to creating a foundation of love and respect between you and this other person. And then apologetics can still happen. You know, it's not to say that you're just going to abandon apologetics. It's that you've got to have a foundation, the right kind of foundation. You can't have a foundation of like, I don't even know if this makes sense, but a foundation of arguments doesn't really make sense relationally. A foundation of love does. And when you build on top of that, then you can then have good conversations. And I think, like, if you've been struggling with having productive conversations with people, that could be one of the issues. It could just be that you're approaching this the completely wrong way. And you're like, that's just not one of your goals, is to really love the other person. And it's biblical, you know, there's reasons to love on the person that you're dialoguing with.
Well, Pope Francis has made this distinction himself. He's talked about the wrongness of proselytism and the good of evangelism, where proselytism is viewed as using coercion or manipulation, or even, you know, just, I'm going to beat somebody in this argument and then I defeated your argument, so you have to convert.
Yeah.
That would be the idea of and of this sense of, since I defeated your argument, that's another notch on the belt, I got another one. That would be the kind of illicit proselytism that Pope Francis has talked about. Whereas evangelism, of opening that dialogue, of asking questions, of presenting the joy of the faith and why you find it compelling, and answering misconceptions and objections. I guess maybe the way to look at it, to close it out, would be, when Catholics engage Protestants, you don't want to look at it as like a boxing match, you know, or something like that. It's more of like a hike, and it takes a while, and you want to walk alongside someone, and if they need to take a break, let them take a break.
Yeah.
Don't take them on a 4-mile hike after a long trip. Laura, just kidding. My wife loves her. She's notorious in our family for, you want to go on a walk, but it's got to be a 4-mile walk. Otherwise, it's not worth it. So, but sometimes it's like, I just need a little break. I'll keep walking with you. I just want a little break. And maybe that happens in our relationships when we're sharing our faith. Let them know, here's something. Think about it. But I'm always here if you want to talk about it more. So. I
had another one, and it just slipped my mind. It was a good one. I got it back. Okay. Good. I think, because we deal in the apologetics world, we grow so accustomed to other people who act and think like us, right? So me and the friends that I have online now, everyone cares about philosophy. Everyone cares about apologetics. They really care about arguments. They really care about logical thinking. But I think what you may get into a sticky situation is if you try to engage a Protestant, for example, who's not into apologetics or not into philosophy, doesn't really care about having these sort of logical structures and care about all these rational reasons and stuff.
Yeah.
So you may just basically not communicate in the way that the other person needs to be communicated with.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that I've had to learn as well, is that like not everyone needs to have like a deductive argument with a conclusion that necessarily follows, you know? And so don't just assume that everyone is going to respond to the way that you think.
Yeah.
Maybe is a way of putting it. And actually try to listen to what the other person is trying to communicate. Which may not be, because one of the issues that I've had is I've tried to put objections to Catholicism in this sort of rigid, logical form. But even like, there was a video that I was watching from Gavin Ortlund, and I was like, I literally can't follow the logical form of this, of what he's trying to argue. And I was like, what are the steps of the argument? What is the conclusion? But maybe that's the wrong way of like interpreting what he was trying to say.
It's more of an intuitive argument.
Yeah.
Or a non-rational appeal to like what seems to be.
And so don't just assume that everyone is going to be thinking in these like really rigid. and this may be more, again, one of these idiosyncratic points.
Sure.
Because I don't know that everyone actually does that. But as someone who has, I mean, I've lived and breathed philosophy and apologetics for several years. And so that's just like part of who I am now. Mm-hmm. But not everyone's like that. You know, if you've got a Protestant friend who's just like, they just go to church. Yeah. And then you're like, okay, well, here's all these reasons why the papacy is true. It's like that may be the completely wrong way to go about like trying to persuade them of Catholicism. So yeah. I don't really have the answer to that. Like, what should you do in a case of? Well,
but that's what we're talking about now, is just what not to do. Yeah. And what not to do is to assume that everybody will respond to the same way.
Exactly. Don't assume that everyone's going to respond, well, in the way that you would hope that they would respond. Or
yeah. No, you want to once again be able to walk alongside them and let them know the door is always open. And if the answer is no, I'm not convinced, you're still there to will other goods in their life, that you're not just going to abandon them because you didn't get them. That would be treating them instrumentally. So I think that's all very helpful. So, hey, this is great. Oh, I do have one last thing. I want to recommend our listeners. And I think it's always funny when I record these, I have to think, I think I did an episode before, right? I'm hoping I did, where I talked about one of the best ways Catholics can reach Protestants. Now I got to record that episode and make sure it gets up, because I'm referencing it before it happened. This is like time travel. Right. I thought one of the best ways is just and I talked about this here on our chat, you know, being really good on stuff we agree on, like answering atheism, answering pro-abortion arguments, things that we passionately agree about that people want to come around to. I am so grateful that you're Catholic, because I, for a long time...
Let me cut you off. Am I Catholic now? Or how does that... What is the right terminology to use?
I'm going to say... Sorry, I was speaking shorthandedly. You're a catechumen now.
Okay.
I think
that's the right term?
Yeah, because I came in, I wasn't baptized.
Okay.
So I was a straight up pagan.
Okay.
So like when I was, you know, if I had died during my conversion experience, I would have had a baptism of desire. It could have buried me in the Catholic cemetery, because I had actively desired baptism, and I was referred to as a catechumen.
Okay.
And I believe the same term would apply to someone who's seeking confirmation, who is baptized, seeking full communion with the church. So it's not a done deal until you receive the sacrament of confirmation.
Okay.
You're like a catechumen, I would say. But
sorry to
no
take you off.
Choo choo. Train's coming back on the track now. Finding the things that here's what it was. I want more Catholics. There's a lot of Catholics who engage in the Catholic Protestant dialogue or apologetics. But one of the things that I started when I started Catholic Answers 10 years ago was, where are the Catholics doing atheism? Where are the Catholics doing the pro-life stuff? And that's why I wrote my first books were Answering Atheism and Persuasive Pro-Life. Because like what brought me to Christianity was the work of William Lane Craig, J.P. Moreland, like those people. And then other Catholics came along, you know, showed me, you know, their apologetics. But I was thinking, well, Catholics, we have a rich intellectual tradition. And where are the Catholics? Where's the Catholics who are debating atheists? Where are the Catholics who are doing this? And I didn't see it, or engaging the more sophisticated. I tell you what would grind my gears was just hearing Catholics on like Twitter saying, oh, just, you know, an atheist, like, will prove God exists, linked to Summa Theologia. There you go. What more do you need? I'm just like, Aquinas even says this is not a proof. This is just a summary for a beginner's theology class. It's not a rigorous proof in the Summa. And so I was just so frustrated. And since the 10 years I've been at Catholic Answers, I've wanted to really encourage Catholics, like, hey, because there are good Catholic philosophers who do high level Christian theism stuff. I mean, you cover that stuff all the time. You have Alex Pruss, Ed Fazer, Francis Beckwith. You've got
Koons.
Rob Koons is amazing. And it's like in the Catholic philosophy world and in pro-life, there's a bunch of Catholic philosophers, Pat Lee, Robert George, Frank Beckwith again, Chris Kazer. But at the popular level,
I didn't know that Kazer was. That's cool.
Oh, he's written he's got like one of the best.
Is he a convert or a
I don't know.
Cradle Catholic?
I'll have to ask. I do not know the answer to that one, but he's one of the best books on abortion. Hands down.
Yeah, I think most people recognize that too.
Oh, yeah. But then it's like at the popular level.
Didn't he have like a new work coming out?
third edition of Ethics of Abortion just came out. But at the popular level, I was just seeing a bunch of Protestants who were doing, like Randy Alcorn and stuff, doing the Scott Klusendorf, doing Stand to Reason, Greg Kokel, doing the pro-life stuff. And I'm like, come on, Catholics, what are we doing here? So that's why I'm just so pumped that you can bring high-level, rigorous defense of Christian theism to Catholic audiences. Now, they'll say that you're, when they, especially after you're received in the church, like, you're Catholic. But this is stuff they're not getting. And that's why I definitely want to encourage people to support what Cameron is doing, because your channel is focusing now on mere Christianity. That's what it's going to be focusing on. And
which is actually a way of uniting Protestants and Catholics.
Yes. Like I was so jazzed when I went to CCV2, Capturing Christianity Conference.
CCV1.
V1. It was that V1. That was the first one.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. But I was at the exchange with Alex. I was like the V2 exchange. But the V1, and just being there and just talking Christian theism with a bunch of other Protestants, and where we agree and where we disagree about how to do that. And it was just so fun. But
there's not enough of that.
There's a ton of Protestants who are out doing that stuff.
Right.
But to have Catholics who are putting that material out there, getting past the village atheism, getting past the Dawkins atheism to like
engaging the best
stuff.
Oppie and everyone.
Yeah, and now that stuff from Oppie and Mackey and Sobel, that's being popularized by atheist YouTubers that want to up their game. So like, we need your work so badly. So that's why, because I know there have been some people who no longer want to support your work just because you are no longer Protestant.
Yeah.
And I find that that's so sad, because like, for example, like I sometimes financially support missionaries who do pro-life work, and the ones I support are Catholic. But if one of them said, you know what, I don't think I can be Catholic anymore, I'm going to be Protestant, but I'm still going to be doing all this great pro-life stuff, I would tell them, hey, I'm going to be praying for you, but you know what? I want you to, as long as what you're focusing on is doing the pro-life, keep at it, because you're awesome at it. I would never say like, you betrayed me, I don't want you saving babies anymore. What? Of course I want them still saving babies, and we'll talk about the theology stuff later. So the same, you have to be so sad for a Protestant. Oh, you're not Protestant anymore. I don't want you showing people Jesus rose from the dead. What? So that's why it's unfortunate if I see people who no longer support you. That's why I would encourage Catholics, go support Cameron so he can do the fundamental thing. Because here's the thing, folks. I'm gonna pontificate a little. I don't like it when Catholics let Protestants prove Christian theism, and then the Catholic walks in, and here's why you should believe in the papacy. It's like, dude, it's like you let the other guy do all this heavy lifting, and you just kind of walk in.
Yeah.
Why don't you give the whole case? Man?
Yeah.
You should do the whole case.
Yeah.
And which in some respects, like using classical theism, I think can be stronger. So it's like, but that's why, I just sincerely hope people will support what you're doing, especially to make up for people who would make what I think is the wrong decision in that regard. How can people support more what you're doing in Capturing Christianity?
There's two ways, and I appreciate everything that you said about that. Patreon.com/Capturing Christianity is the way to give monthly, and that's the main thing that we need right now, support monthly. But if you'd like to make a one-time donation, you can go to our website, capturingchristianity.com/donate, and you can make a one-time donation there. But one thing I wanted to piggyback off of that is my view. I've held this view even as a Protestant, is that the body of Christ. Okay, so here's the guy that I typically will cite when I make this point. William Lane Craig, jack of all trades. He knows like everything about everything when it comes to philosophy, like any subject in philosophy.
He always makes this voice.
Yeah, you can I mean, he's not omniscient, obviously, but he just, his breadth of knowledge in philosophy is astounding. Yeah, he knows so much about all these different subjects. But I think that people like William Lane Craig are very rare. And moving forward, I don't know that we're going to have people like that that are a sort of jack of all trades. Yeah. And I think that the body of Christ moving forward, especially when it pertains to apologetics and stuff, it's going to be an army of specialists. So in that's one of the things that I see with Capturing Christianity is that we're specializing in this one area that is ultimately going, what I think and I hope is going to unite Protestants and Orthodox and Catholics together. Right. But it's one aspect of building the case for Christianity.
Yeah.
And it's really important, again, because people nowadays are specializing in different things. The philosophers that you mentioned earlier, Rob Koons and Alex Proust and stuff, they're not like a William Lane Craig in the sense of like using, I mean, he's got a PhD in philosophy and a PhD in theology. And it's like, that's unusual, first of all, to have 2 PhDs and then to be able to build a case for the resurrection historically, but then also have all of these different, he's famous for defending the Kalam cosmological argument, and he
does the resurrection.
Exactly. And he does both of those at the highest level. But nowadays what you'll find is that you'll have like one guy who's just super great on one argument.
Yeah.
And what we need to do is, I mean, what Capturing Christianity does is we kind of like take all of those guys and build a whole case using all of their work. So it's like a whole bunch of little William Lane Craigs instead of like one big,
There's a philosophy thought experiment. This big Is it a William Lane Craig apologist if it's a large apologist constructed of thousands of William Lane Craigs? If you have a transitive relation there. But no, you're right. And also but Craig is unique, not just because he has 2 PhDs, but he's also an accomplished debater and an excellent public speaker.
Yes.
And popularizing, because he can write also a popular level work. So he can write, sometimes he'll write works at like he can write at the easy, the intermediate, and the advanced level. Mm-hmm. So you had people like philosophers who can only write at the advanced level.
Yeah.
And so some people in the world, you see them just translate it down for people to understand. Mm-hmm. And what you do is you've got all those people in one place.
Mm-hmm. Now, I will say, though, that, I mean, we're not always able to distill these ideas at the level of like a beginner's level. So sometimes we do get a little bit deeper. And I think that...
And that's okay.
Yeah, and we need to be able to do that. I mean, it does take some work and effort, but we actually have, I mean, I could mention that. We have some free resources that can help you get started if you're just coming into the dialogue and stuff. There's a lot of terms that get thrown around, like ontology and epistemology and all these different sorts of terms and Bayesianism. What you can do if you'd like to learn what those terms mean, if you'd like to actually start to get deeper into things, if you go to any video that we have on our channel, there's a link to a free PDF of all of these different terms defined, and we've got links to like philosophy encyclopedias and stuff so that you can actually go and study those terms deeper and more in depth and stuff. But it's a free resource to help you along the way, to help you, because that's the main thing. It's not that people are like the material is too smart for people to understand or like too intellectual.
Right.
In some cases, I mean, I will say, like some of the people that I interview, they're just too smart.
Well, you got like Alex Proust. I think he has a PhD in philosophy and mathematics.
I haven't interviewed him.
I know, he's just like the mysterious philosopher.
He doesn't do that kind of thing.
He doesn't have to go hide at Baylor behind a bush. You're like, Alex!
There are some people like Richard Swinburne, where an interview with him, sometimes it can get difficult to follow just because he's so smart.
And then I end up saying, what would be wrong with a world that has meteors crashing about with no sentient life? I think that would be beautiful, Cameron. I can listen to him all day, whatever he talks about.
Your accents are terrible, though.
This is true. Oi, Matt Fradd, is that true? Is it a terrible accent? Oh, man.
Please stop. So the point that I was making is it's not that the material is too difficult to understand. It's that you probably just don't know the definitions to these like terms.
Yeah.
But if you knew those definitions, then it's the same with any like specialized field. If you're a plumber, you're going to use terms with other plumbers that the non-plumber is not going to understand. Just in the same thing is true once you get into apologetics and you learn these terms that are sort of shorthand for these really complex things. But once you learn the concept and you learn the word, then you can start using them yourself, and it just makes things flow a lot easier, and you can have these sort of deeper conversations. But Yeah, you do need to do a little bit of work.
And you got those links under every video on the Capturing Christianity page.
Yes, if you just go to any video, there's going to be a link, free resources. Just click that link and you sign up, and then you get the PDF. It's also on our website too. You can search for it there.
And people can support you at Patreon, Capturing Christianity.
Patreon.com/Capturing Christianity.
And then you had another non-Patreon way.
Yes. So if you don't like Patreon, or if you'd like to do a one-time donation, capturingchristianity.com/donate.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much, and look forward to future conversations with you on this and many other issues. Thank you guys, and I hope you all have a very blessed day.
Hey, thanks for watching this video. If you want to help us produce more great content like this, be sure to click subscribe and go to TrentHornPodcast.com to become a premium subscriber. You'll help us create more videos like this and get access to bonus content and sneak peeks of our upcoming projects.